My name is Sophie Lennox. I'm 68 years old, and for a very long time, I believed my life had already ended. Not physically. My heart still beat. I still woke up every morning, still watered the flowers outside my porch, still folded laundry, still paid bills, still smiled politely at neighbors who asked how I was doing. But the real part of me, the woman who used to laugh too loudly at dinner parties and dance barefoot in the kitchen while pasta boiled over the stove, disappeared the night my husband died. Orlando Casillas had been my husband for 41 years, and losing him felt like somebody reached into my chest and removed every future I had left. Even now, 10 years later, I still remember the exact sound of the phone ringing at 11:43 that night. Nobody forgets a phone call that changes their entire existence. I had been asleep in our bedroom with the television still on. Orlando had gone to help a friend whose truck had broken down on the highway outside Sacramento. He kissed my forehead before leaving. "Don't wait up for me, Soph," he whispered. Those were the last words he ever said to me. A drunk driver crossed the median 30 minutes later. The state trooper who called me sounded exhausted, like he had already ruined too many lives that week. Welcome to the Dark Decisions channel. If you enjoy hearing stories that could be yours or someone you know's, subscribe to the channel and like this video, because this story is more common than we think. I remember standing barefoot in the kitchen while he explained what happened. I remember staring at Orlando's coffee mug still sitting beside the sink. I remember thinking something completely insane. Who's going to drink that coffee tomorrow? Grief does strange things to the human brain. People imagine screaming and collapsing dramatically. But sometimes, grief is quieter. Sometimes it's staring at a coffee mug and realizing nobody will ever touch it again. The funeral passed like a fog. Friends brought casseroles. Neighbors hugged me too tightly. Our daughters, Vanessa and Claire, tried to stay strong while secretly crying in bathrooms. Everyone kept telling me I would heal with time. But time didn't heal me. Time only taught me how to survive while broken. For the next decade, my world became painfully small. I retired from the accounting office 2 years after Orlando died. I stopped traveling. I stopped attending parties. I stopped answering calls half the time because conversations exhausted me. People eventually stopped inviting me places. Widows become invisible after a while. At first, people surround you. Then, months pass. Then, years. And eventually, the world quietly decides your story is over. Mine certainly felt over. Every morning followed the exact same routine. Coffee, crossword puzzle, feed the birds in the backyard, watch old sitcom reruns. Sleep, repeat. I convinced myself that routine was peace, but deep down, it was loneliness, wearing comfortable clothes. Then one rainy Thursday changed everything. I almost didn't go to the community center that morning. Claire had been begging me for months to join some kind of social activity. "You need people around you, Mom." "I have people around me." "No," she said gently, "you have walls around you." That sentence irritated me for days because I knew she was right. So when the local community center announced a weekly painting class for seniors, I signed up mostly to stop my daughters from worrying. I hadn't painted since high school. Frankly, I expected to hate every second of it. That Thursday, rain hammered against the windows while 12 retirees sat around folding tables pretending to understand watercolor techniques. I was terrible. Absolutely terrible. My tree looked like a diseased broccoli stalk. The woman beside me tried to compliment it anyway. "That's very abstract." "It's supposed to be an oak tree," I muttered. A deep laugh came from across the table. I looked up and saw him for the first time. Edward Lively, 71 years old. Silver hair. Warm brown eyes. Navy sweater with paint stains on the sleeves. And the kindest smile I had seen in years. "I thought it was broccoli, too," he admitted. I should have been offended. Instead, I laughed. Actually laughed. A real laugh. The sound startled me, because I hadn't heard it from myself in a very long time. Edward grinned. "There she is." "What?" That laugh. "Sounds like it has been trapped somewhere for years." I didn't know what to say to that. So I looked back down at my horrible painting and pretended to focus, but something inside me shifted that afternoon. A tiny crack in the grief I had lived inside for 10 years. After class ended, people slowly packed their supplies. Edward approached my table carrying his painting. Unlike mine, his watercolor landscape looked professional. "You've done this before," I said. "My late wife loved painting," he answered. "I learned so I could spend time with her." "Late wife?" The words landed softly between us. Not awkward, not pitying, just understood. "She passed?" I asked quietly. "7 years ago." "I'm sorry." "Me too." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Rain tapped against the windows. Then Edward smiled gently. "You want to grab coffee?" My stomach tightened immediately. Coffee? At my age? It felt ridiculous. Teenagers dated, young people dated. People with futures dated. Not widows nearing 70. "I don't think so," I answered too quickly. His expression never changed. "No problem. Maybe another time." He walked away kindly, without pressure. But the entire drive home, my chest felt strangely unsettled. Because for the first time in 10 years, somebody had looked at me like a woman instead of a grieving artifact. That terrified me. The following Thursday, I returned to painting class, and Edward saved the seat beside him. We started talking casually: books, weather, music, our children, little things. But little things slowly became bigger conversations. I learned Edward had worked as a history teacher for 38 years. He had 3 grandchildren who adored him. He played jazz records while cooking spaghetti sauce every Sunday. He also talked about his late wife, Margaret, with honesty instead of avoidance. That mattered to me, because people often expected widows and widowers to erase their spouses if they ever moved forward. Edward never erased Margaret. And somehow, that made me feel safer talking about Orlando too. One afternoon, he asked what Orlando had been like. Most people avoided asking me that question. They feared making me sad. But grief becomes lonelier when nobody speaks the name of the person you lost. So I told him everything. How Orlando sang terribly during road trips. How he cried during animal rescue commercials. How he used too much garlic in every recipe. How he held my hand during scary movies even though he was the one getting frightened. Edward listened carefully, not impatiently, not awkwardly. Carefully. When I finished, he smiled. "He sounds like somebody worth missing." And for some reason, that sentence made tears burn behind my eyes. Because it acknowledged something important. Loving Edward would never mean I stopped loving Orlando. The two things could exist together. Still, I fought my feelings for months. Every time Edward invited me somewhere, guilt flooded me. A walk through the botanical gardens. Coffee after class. Lunch near the marina, simple things. Yet every pleasant moment felt almost disloyal. One evening, Vanessa visited unexpectedly. She found me sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my phone. "You're smiling at your messages," she noticed immediately. "I am not." "You absolutely are." I rolled my eyes. "It's just someone from painting class." Vanessa crossed her arms dramatically. Don't make this weird." "Oh my God. It is a man." I felt heat rush to my face like a teenager at 68 years old, which seemed absurd. Vanessa sat beside me more gently. "Mom, are you happy?" The question caught me off guard, because I honestly didn't know. Happy felt like a dangerous word. "I don't know what I'm allowed to feel anymore," I admitted quietly. Vanessa reached for my hand. "Dad loved you more than anything." I swallowed hard. "He's gone because of an accident, Mom. Not because he stopped loving you." Tears blurred my vision instantly. "You don't understand," I whispered. "No, I do," her voice cracked. "I watched you die with him for 10 years. That sentence shattered something inside me. Because she was right. I had survived physically, but emotionally. Part of me had been buried beside Orlando. That night, I sat alone on the porch long after sunset. I kept thinking about Orlando, about our marriage, about the promises we made, until suddenly, I remembered something I hadn't thought about in years. 2 months before he died, we attended a retirement party for one of his coworkers. During the drive home, we somehow started discussing death. Morbid topic for a Friday evening. But Orlando always talked openly about difficult things. If I die first, he told me casually, promise me something. I laughed. You're not dying first. Sophie. Fine. What? Don't turn into a ghost. I remember rolling my eyes. What does that even mean? It means keep living. He glanced at me seriously. Fall in love again if you want to. I nearly choked. At my age, at any age. I laughed then, but sitting alone on the porch 10 years later, those words suddenly returned with painful clarity. Don't turn into a ghost. And that's exactly what I had become, a ghost living inside our old routines. The next morning, Edward texted asking whether I wanted to visit a weekend street fair downtown. Normally, I would have invented an excuse. Instead, I stared at the message for nearly 5 minutes before replying, yes, just one word, but my hands shook, typing it. The street fair smelled like roasted almonds, coffee, and rain-soaked pavement. Musicians played jazz near the fountain, while vendors sold handmade jewelry and watercolor paintings. Edward walked beside me comfortably, never trying too hard. That was one thing I loved about him. He never forced joy. He simply made space for it. At one booth, an elderly couple danced slowly to a saxophone player. Without warning, Edward extended his hand toward me. Dance with me. I stared at him in horror. In public? We're old, Sophie. Nobody's looking at us. I laughed to spite myself. Then I placed my hand in his. The moment his fingers closed around mine, emotion hit me so suddenly it nearly stole my breath. Because I realized something terrifying. I didn't feel dead anymore. We swayed awkwardly near the fountain while strangers passed around us. And for the first time in an entire decade, life felt warm again. Not perfect, not healed, but warm. That night, guilt attacked harder than ever. I stood in my bedroom staring at Orlando's photograph on the dresser. I'm sorry, I whispered. Then I started crying. Deep, ugly crying. The kind that empties years of pain all at once. I slid down beside the bed, clutching that photograph against my chest. I don't know how to do this, I sobbed. And somewhere in the middle of those tears, I finally understood something important. Grief had convinced me love was a limited resource, as if giving affection to someone new somehow stole it from Orlando. But that wasn't true. Love expands. It carries people forward. It changes shape. It survives. It survives. The next week, Edward invited me to dinner at his house. I almost canceled 3 separate times. But when I arrived, soft jazz floated through the kitchen while spaghetti sauce simmered on the stove. The smell instantly made me laugh. What Edward asset? Orlando used enough garlic to kill a vampire colony. Edward grinned. Good men understand garlic. We spent hours talking over dinner. Not just politely, honestly. About loneliness, about aging, about fear. At one point, Edward became unusually quiet. Then he looked directly at me. I need to tell you something. My chest tightened. What? I was afraid to meet you. Why? Because after Margaret died, I convinced myself life was basically waiting room time. I stared at him, because that was exactly how I had felt. Edward continued softly, then you laughed at your broccoli tree. I burst out laughing again, and suddenly he reached across the table and held my hand. Neither of us moved. The room felt still, gentle, safe. You make life feel alive again, he whispered. Tears filled my eyes instantly, because I wanted to say the same thing. Instead, Fear slipped out first. I'm scared. So, AM1, what if people think we're ridiculous? Eduardes miúde? Sophie, we survived burying the loves of our lives. I think we can survive looking ridiculous. That might have been the moment I fell in love with him. Not dramatically, not suddenly, quietly. Like sunlight slowly returning after a brutal winter. Months passed, then 6, then almost a year. Edward became part of my life so naturally that sometimes I forgot how lonely the first once felt. We cooked together, visited museums, argued playfully over crossword answers. He kissed my forehead every single time he left, just like Orlando used to. Oddly, that no longer hurt. It comforted me, because love had entered my life twice in 2 completely different forms, and both mattered. One autumn evening, Edward and I sat on my porch watching orange leaves scatter across the yard. The sky glowed pink above the trees. I used to think my life ended at 58, I admitted quietly. Edward looked at me. What changed? I smiled softly. You did? He squeezed my hand. No, you changed. I frowned. What do you mean? You finally gave yourself permission to keep living. I sat silently for a long moment, then I realized he was right. Edward didn't rescue me. He simply knocked on the door of a life I had locked from the inside. And eventually, I chose to open it. A few weeks ago, my granddaughter Emma asked me something while we baked cookies together. Grandma, she said carefully, is it possible to love 2 people equally? Children ask the deepest questions so casually. I thought about it for a moment. Then I answered honestly, no. She blinked. No. You love people differently, not more or less, just differently. Emma considered that seriously for a moment while pressing cookie dough into the baking tray. Do you still love Grandpa Orlando? With all my heart, I answered softly. And do you love Edward too? I smiled before I could stop myself. Yes. She tilted her head thoughtfully, then grinned. Then your heart just got bigger. I laughed, but the truth of that sentence stayed with me long after she left the kitchen, because that was exactly what happened. For years, I believed grief and love couldn't exist together. I thought moving forward meant leaving Orlando behind somehow, betraying him, replacing him. But love doesn't work that way. Real love leaves fingerprints on your soul forever. Orlando was the great love of my youth. The man who helped me raise children. The man who danced with me in grocery store aisles and burned toast every Sunday morning while pretending he meant to do it that way. Nothing could erase him. Nothing ever will. But Edward became something equally important. He became proof that life doesn't stop giving just because it once took everything away. And maybe that's the cruelest thing about grief. It convinces you the story ended when the pain began. But sometimes the story keeps going quietly while you aren't looking. Sometimes healing arrives disguised as a terrible watercolor painting and a man laughing across the table. Last month, Edward and I took a weekend trip to Monterey. Nothing extravagant. Just a small oceanside hotel with creaky floors and terrible coffee. The kind of place Orlando and I used to love. That realization hit me while Edward and I walked beside the water at sunset. For a second, guilt returned. Sharp, familiar, like an old scar aching before rain. Edward noticed immediately. You disappeared somewhere, he said gently. I looked out toward the ocean. I used to come here with Orlando. Edward nodded quietly. Then he surprised me. Tell me about it. So I did. I told him about the year Orlando insisted on renting bicycles, even though neither of us knew how to ride them properly anymore. I told him about the seafood restaurant where he accidentally knocked an entire tray of oysters onto a businessman's lap. Edward laughed so hard he nearly lost his balance. And standing there beside him, I realized something important. The memories no longer felt like chains. They felt like company. That night, after dinner, Edward and I sat on the hotel balcony listening to waves crash against the shore below us. The air smelled like salt and cold wind. Edward reached for my hand. You know what I think? he asked. What? I think Orlando would be happy you're laughing again. My throat tightened instantly. For years, I had tortured myself wondering whether moving forward dishonored the life I shared with my husband. But deep down, I think Edward was right. Because Orlando loved me deeply. And people who truly love you never want your life to end when theirs does. A few days later, I visited Orlando's grave alone for the first time in nearly a year. I brought fresh flowers and sat quietly beside the headstone while autumn leaves drifted across the cemetery grass. Usually those visits destroyed me emotionally. This time felt different. Not easier, just calmer. I traced my fingers gently across his name, Orlando Casillas, beloved husband and father. Then I smiled through tears. You were right, I whispered. A breeze moved softly through the trees around me, and for the first time since losing him, I no longer felt trapped between the past and the future. I finally understood something grief had hidden from me for 10 years. Moving forward is not the same thing as moving on. I will never move on from Orlando, but I finally learned how to move forward while still carrying his love with me. And that changed everything. These days, my mornings look different. Edward calls almost every morning around 8 o'clock just to ask if I'm awake. He already knows I am. I still drink coffee on the porch, still feed the birds, still do crossword puzzles. But now there's music playing in the kitchen again. Now there's somebody texting me terrible jokes during the afternoon. Now there's laughter echoing through rooms that once felt unbearably silent. Life did not magically become perfect. I still have hard days. Some nights, grief sneaks up on me unexpectedly. A song, a photograph, the smell of Orlando's old cologne on someone passing by in a store. Pain never fully disappears when you lose someone you truly loved. But joy returned too. And I spent 10 years believing it never would. Last week, Edward came over for dinner, carrying flowers and a pie he absolutely destroyed while baking. The crusts looked like concrete. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the plates. I followed the recipe exactly, he argued. You created a weapon, Edward. He pointed at me dramatically. You're rude for someone eating my pie. Later that evening, we danced slowly in the kitchen while Frank Sinatra played softly from the radio. At one point, Edward pulled back just enough to look at me. You know, he said quietly, I almost didn't join that painting class. I blinked. What? My daughter signed me up, said I was becoming a hermit. I burst out laughing immediately. Claire said the exact same thing to me. Edward smiled warmly. Good thing our children interfered? I rested my head gently against his chest. Yes, I whispered. Good thing they did. If there's one thing I've learned at 68 years old, it's this. Life is unpredictable in both terrible and beautiful ways. One phone call can destroy your world, but one unexpected conversation can slowly rebuild it too. I lost the love of my life 10 years ago, and I truly believed my heart had died with him. I was wrong, because hearts are strange. They break, they scar, they grieve, but somehow, they keep finding ways to love again. So if you're listening to my story while grieving someone you lost, or while wondering whether happiness can ever return after heartbreak, let me tell you this. Your story may not be over yet. Sometimes love arrives late. Sometimes healing takes years. And sometimes life surprises you when you least expect it. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments. And tell me honestly, have you ever found love when you thought your heart would never open again?